I want to speak to something that has to do with ego, but something other and. I came across some information by Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist of the 20th century. He was speaking of the hero's journey. And I have been involved in that as a point of study all my life, because I feel that we are all in the hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell, who studied all of the cultures of the whole planet, really, stated that within the myths of the world. Now, the myths of the world are not fables or fantasies. The myth of a human being, each one of us has a myth, a way of seeing and being. And then there is a collective myth of humanity, one of togetherness or one of separation and so forth. But he talks about the archetypal process, the cycle of living a life, not only for a human being, but for the collective of humanity. And the circle is much like this clock that's here. It's a circle of time. And the first beginning is when we are in our comfort zone at 12 o'clock. But then there may be a point within our experience where we have what he calls an almost supernatural element that moves us out of that comfort zone and into a great discovery. That you and I are within that whole process. And I would like to just share some of that process with you. It's letting go of that safety, that comfort zone, and that we're moved out into life itself with all of its challenges and temptations, and he calls them passages, initiations, and so forth. That you and I are within that context. And somewhere around 3 o'clock on the dial of the circle of life, there is what he calls death and rebirth. Going from a previous layer or level into a place of renewed discovery of who and what it is that we are. And he calls this a monomyth. There is only one myth in the human experience, that from going from a place of what might be called Eden through the timeline of the whole of the life experience back into the homecoming. That first we are in this homecoming place. We are at home. And then we move out through our comfort zone and through the initiations and passages of this life. And we come to a place about midstream. And it's interesting how we call it midlife crisis. Something moves inside of us to create a crisis of faith, perhaps. But it is also an opportunity because we, within the divine plan of the circle of our archetypal journey, we are letting go of a previous layer, a previous self that we thought that we were. And that this can be a very critical point in our life situation. We don't know who we are anymore or what life is all about. But underneath it, there is this archetypal stimulus that is moving through us to bring us into coming home to oneself again. Joseph Campbell speaks of that process as one of atonement. And oftentimes we may think of the word atonement as atonement for sins, but it's not about that at all. In the Course in Miracles, they call it at-one-ment, coming to a place of at-one-ment with a transformational process, that is the whole reason behind the death and rebirth, of living a life, of coming to a place where we are transformed through the renewal of our minds. And that is a quote from Paul of the Bible. Paul was Saul before he was Paul. And he was really dedicated to the persecution of those that were called later Christians. But they were just simply people that were feeling deeply a way inside of their being that was new, that they were on their own hero's journey. And Paul, or Saul, was dedicated to persecuting the people that were outside of the box of his known belief system. And then he had a death and rebirth on his pathway. He went through initiations and passages too. And he became renewed within his consciousness. He became transformed through the renewal of his mind. He went through a process of atonement, of at-one-ment. And then there was in the last 15 minutes on the clock, there was a process of return. That you and I are in this cycle. And it is a leveled cycle. We could be at a place of being home, resting within ourselves after having just gone through the whole cycle in our lives, through the passages and the initiations and so forth. You may have had a death and a feeling of rebirth in your own life, and then moving into a time of atonement or at-one-ment with your spirit, and then coming to a place of return, coming home once again to yourself. Enter the ego. Didn't think I was going to get to that, did you? Well, you know, the ego in our belief system of the world, in the Course in Miracles and so forth, has been called the adversary, the devil. It's been given a real bad rap. Michael Singer from The Untethered Soul calls it the inner roommate that you just don't want to be your roommate. It has been in promotion of a dream. A dream that is a dream of separation. That you and I are dreaming. And it's interesting that the Buddha 2,600 years ago was asked, "Are you the chosen one?" And he simply said, "No, I am simply awake from the dream." So that you and I, within the drama of this life, within the seeming separation of life, are within this great circle of experience, of coming into a place of waking up from the dream. Course in Miracles also talks about that we move from the insane separation into what it is called the Christ mind. That you and I have this Christ mind within us now, in this very moment. And that when we forget, we suffer deeply. We suffer deeply. So the hero's journey is one of departure, challenge, death, rebirth, transformation, atonement, and return. It is the journey of the soul. I remember about 8 years ago, there was this woman at my church in Cottonwood. She was a beautiful, beautiful soul. And she came up one time and she says, "You know, I'm just living like a dolphin in a shark tank. All these people are trying to take my idea." She was trying to get a patent for her idea. She was real hopeful, but she was kind of on that precipice, right, of getting it done and happening. And then someone came up to me one day and she said, "You know," she took her own life. And my response was almost immediately shock. But then I got really angry. Not with her, but with the ego. And I recognized that that was futility, to be angry at the ego. But you know what it did? It helped me to get more and more committed to the process of waking up. Because the egoic mind is basically working in this life without love. And I came to a place of really getting it. That the solution, the divine solution for all of us is love. That if we love enough, it can overcome any obstacle, any situation, even facing our own death. If we can love enough, that is the solution. And I would ask us today to recommit ourselves to love. Are you willing to do that? I mean, what's more important in this life than love? Emmett Fox, the great metaphysician of the 20th century, who wrote Sermon on the Mount and other books, said if we could love enough, we would be the most powerful being on the whole planet. I tell you, I know in my own life right now of making a transition from preparing to leave Vancouver, where I have loved and felt so much love from you. That's where I have to stay, is here. I've got About 3 weeks left here. Well, thank you. What a loving gesture. About 3 weeks left. And you know what I take with me? Is that I have loved and I have been loved by you. The world is crying out for it. The world, the world needs so much love. So, even yesterday we had a memorial service here and the people left these roses and flowers as a gesture of love. Aren't they beautiful? In a little while we'll go downstairs, those that choose to, and we'll have soup as a gesture of love. And there'll be a time of conversation with the board to talk about the next leadership, a gesture, an act of love on their part is to listen to you, to what it is that you want in leadership for Unity Center of Vancouver. It's an act of love on their part, of listening, of mindfulness, of holding you in respect. Anyway, I don't want to make the ego wrong. We're not going to get rid of the ego, folks. You know what I really tuned into this morning, and I'm going to close on this. What I really tuned into this morning was that the ego is choice. On the circle of life, we are constantly choosing how we're going to show up, how we're going to allow love to bless us, and how we're going to bless life. Ego is a choice. It's that part of our minds on the hero's journey where we're constantly choosing who it is that we are and what it is, how we're going to show up in each and every moment. I just choosing to show up right now and being honest. What else can we do? Amen.